What is up, everybody? It's Ed Gow Jr. here from Dad Central, and you are watching the one and only the Dad Central show that is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Happy to be here with Drew Solon. What's going on, Drew?
Well, another great day, Ed, to have good conversations and to bring, I think, content that really helps uplift dads.
Excellent. Before we go any further, we want to say that the Dad Central show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there is positive impact. So we always like to thank our sponsor for helping us making these epic global conversations happen. So we have another new friend today.
We do. And if you noticed my, I guess, intonation on uplift, it was on purpose because we have Dr. Charles C. Daniels. He's a therapist and the chief executive officer of Fathers Uplift Incorporated. So they're the U.S.'s first mental health and substance abuse treatment facility for fathers and families. Their main goal is to help fathers become and remain emotionally stable for their children. So Dr. Daniels has spent the last decade providing therapy to Black men, helping them overcome the effects of toxic masculinity, racism, and oppression. And he's taught at Harvard University, Simmons University, and has appeared on numerous television and radio programs, as well as delivering a TED Talk, which I watched and I really enjoyed immensely. And so I'd recommend, if you haven't seen Dr. Daniels' TED Talk, go listen to it now. He's married with two children, lives in Massachusetts. So I'm really excited for this conversation because as a coach, I think at heart, I know that part of Fathers Uplift is coaching and working through some of the barriers that limit people from actually achieving all that they can, in particular in their organizations. And he's going to talk more about it. It's barriers that prevent fathers from being involved in the lives of their children. And then we know the significant impact that makes. So I'm really excited to bring him on and have a great conversation about the work he's doing, his story, and the work he's doing.
Well, since you're excited, let's bring him on. There he is.
Dr.
Hello,
Daniels, welcome.
yeah. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure is ours. Pleasure is ours. Looking forward to learn about a little about you, but also the men in the community you serve. And I'm very excited to have you on the platform today. So, Drew, I'll let you kick it off.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Daniels, as I alluded to, you've got a TED Talk. You've shared a little bit about your story. So we like to start the show off by getting a little bit of that backstory from our guests to help people understand kind of where you came from and what the experience is like. And of course, in particular, focusing on that dad piece. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what life was like for you growing up, and in particular, the relationship that you had or didn't have with your father.
Yeah, life growing up was pretty interesting, but I can say that, typically I tell people that if you want to find your purpose, look at the place that caused you the most pain. And for me,
Mm.
that issue was not having my father around. My father was in and out of my life until the age of 10 years old. Then all of a sudden he was gone for good. And what I did not understand was why he was absent and why he left, right? And then when I got older, set on a journey to find out where he was and what occurred, I found out that dad was experiencing a barrier that prevented him from being in my life, right? Specifically trying to juggle two families and really deal with having a child outside of his marriage, which was me at that particular time. So from blaming myself for his issues and really experiencing a combination of mental health and substance use related issues, I thought the solution would be how do we provide men like my father with the tools and support to stay engaged in their kids' lives? And I tell people this all the time. I say, when I was having my son, who's now 7 years old, and I remember I was becoming a father for the first time, and my mother, she came to the hospital where he was getting ready to be born, and she brought my baby book with her. And in that book, I was flipping through it, and I found a picture of my father holding me for the very first time with this gaze of love and appreciation in his eyes. And then I can tell you that that honestly removed any remnants of a blame from my life. Like I no longer blame myself for my father's absence. I instead saw the love that he always had for me, even when he wasn't physically present. So our assumption at Fathers Uplift is that men do not wake up and say, "Hey, I'm going to be absent today." Right? The issue is, how do we help fathers who want to be present? Fathers in their sane minds and fathers with ambitions and just normal dads. They all want to be what they didn't have of what they've always wanted to be for their children. And we're trying to make that dream a reality at Fathers Uplift. So instead of getting stuck at that barrier, like my father got stuck at, and millions of fathers get stuck at, how do we find out what that barrier is, practice compassion, and help them realize their potential within to be the fathers they've always dreamed of being? So it came from a personal place, and now that pain turned into a purpose that outgrew me, and have a growing team and growing mission that has taken the United States of America by storm. So,
Dr. Daniels, I want to stick to your growing up years. You said your father wasn't around. Did you have any male role models while you were growing up?
I mean, absolutely. I think the first answer to that question is yes. But from our experience at our clinic is that regardless of the presence of those positive male figures, there's always a yearning to know where you came from, and get connected to a father, your father, right? So don't get me wrong; those people have contributed immensely to my life, but that contribution did not delete the yearning for my father and having a relationship with him. So having that saved me, but also not having him really created some issues for me. So,
Yeah, and I can, I think, touch on that as well. When you shared the story about you seeing that photo of your father and the love that he had in his eyes, I had a similar experience not that long ago. I was a father. I have three children, and at the time, my son, who's my youngest child, he was probably about 4 years old. But with my childhood experience, my mother kept a lot of old items, and in that was a birthday card that my father had sent. And I was probably about 10 years old, and I didn't have my father in my life from the time I was about 7. And I'd always struggled with that yearning you talked about, of wanting to have him in my life. And so this birthday card was him in his writing, expressing his love and his just his feelings for me as his son. And as a almost 40-year-old at the time, it actually moved me so much that I broke down in tears and cried, because I had a knowing that my father always loved me, and I'd always wondered and questioned and had some of those questions you talked about in terms of why. So I think it's really, as you said at the end, taken the nation by storm, because I think that there's something really powerful in that recognition of there's always that yearning for a father, your father, where you come from. So that's very powerful. So I just want to share that story. But maybe you can talk a little bit more about the approach you mentioned as well, that talks about compassion, because I don't know that we see a lot of that or talk a lot about that when it comes to fathers.
absolutely.
So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, for me and what we see in the United States of America at my clinic, and a lot of people that we're working with throughout the country, we see that there is a overwhelming number of men that are impacted by the United States of America's perception of what manhood should be, successful masculinity or successful manhood, what you should be doing for your children, the type of lifestyle you need to have to be able to care for them, right? Just these labels, like men are not supposed to cry, men are supposed to be tough, men are supposed to be strong. One thing that we understand when we are becoming fathers in the United States of America, a lot of our family members and hospital entities are really teaching us how to care for the mother, but there is not much information that teaches us how to care for ourselves throughout this process. So there's this huge emphasis on taking care of everybody else, but leaving us behind, right? But also being all things to all people, but not being able to be enough to yourself. So what we said was, looking at the programming needs and looking at, not necessarily programming needs, but looking at the variety of focuses that exist in parenting programs in the United States of America, we saw that there's so many parenting programs that teaches men and women how to be better to their children, but there isn't many programs that teaches men how to parent themselves. So our approach is really looking at this whole parenting structure and what it looks like, and applying those same characteristics that we're teaching men how to do to other people and do to their children, how to care for their loved ones, and say, you know what? How do you become a better parent to yourself? Those same things that you do for other people, what does it look like to be that parent that you didn't have, but that parent that you did have to yourself? And I think that's a different way of reframing self-love, self-worth, self-parenting. But I think it's equally important. Yes, it's important to learn how to be present for your children and learn how to feed a baby and things of that nature, but it's equally important to learn how to be present for yourself. So we focus on the latter, and that's the approach that we take.
Mm.
I like Dr. Daniels what you said there, because from day one, when I was taking this journey about helping fathers and men, I saw a lot of organizations concerned about fatherhood, but not manhood. And I'm a firm believer that before dad became a father, he was a man. So if the man isn't right, it makes that hill of fatherhood steeper. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we see it all the time. Like, you can see the connection between one's capacity to love themselves and one's capacity to love their children, or one's capacity to beat themselves up and blame themselves for things that they cannot control, and one's capacity to take it out on their children or their loved ones. I mean, we think about domestic violence. It's an issue that occurs within before it's projected onto other people. So, really looking at that inner child and how do you be a parent of that inner child, that's the place that we start, you know.
Maybe you can. I know we're probably jumping ahead, but I feel like it's too relevant to not get into it right now. I'm curious to know, that's very counter to a lot of approaches, right?
Mhm.
And it's very counter to, I think, the prevailing perspective you mentioned about men and masculinity. And so, how are you getting that approach to be successful, or how are you getting through the barriers, internal or external, that allows that approach to actually have its effect?
Absolutely. I think it starts with trauma. I think it starts with consciously evaluating the experiences in our lives that cause the most pain, but also evaluating the influence of those experiences on our behavior, on our actions, on the things that we do, on the things that we like and the things that we dislike. I think it all starts with the root of your pain. And we tell men all the time, just because you're older, just because you're 40 or you in your 30s, doesn't mean that what you've experienced as a child left because of your age. It's still intact, right? There's things that you would never be able to forget when you were a child that occurred to you that influences how you act today. And for us, we believe that that is foundational to your parenting. It's foundational to how you are in relationship with other people. It's foundational to the chances that you give yourself after you've been rejected or you've been told no. Do you give yourself another chance, or do you blame yourself for not being able to follow through the first time, or emphasize perfection, or living your dreams through your kids, right? I think all of that is connected through your previous experience. And once we have these conversations with our guys through a therapeutic lens, through a foundation, ground up experience, and talk to them, they end up seeing how important it is for them to really get well acquainted with the child they were, understanding that just because they're older, that child didn't go anywhere. And that's where we try to get them back to. Because I can tell you, age is very important internationally. But just because you're older don't mean that what you experience disappears. It stays intact. And that's the message. And that's how we begin that conversation. And people are open to it. They really are.
Good. I want to come back, and I know this may be jumping ahead, but I think it's relevant in the conversation right now. How important, from your lens, is a father's relationship with his father and that impact that it has on him being a father?
I think it's very important. I think it's no, now, no, granted, some folks may not have relationships with their fathers, and I don't necessarily think that that deters or interferes with the future that they can create for their children, right? But I do think it's important to acknowledge what you did have, also acknowledge what you want to be, and get the support in becoming what you want to be, which goes back to that earlier question, why father figures and other male figures are very important, because I think when it comes to understanding and developing that definition of the man that you want to be in your father's absence, pulling on those other role models could be very beneficial. They were to me. I didn't really understand how a marriage looked like, because I didn't grow up in a household where a family was married. My mother raised me, right? But I saw that in my church community. I saw that amongst the deacons and the ushers in my church, and the mothers in my church would show me what women need and how to treat a woman, and the pastor and the first lady, right? So, you know, we all have those substitutes. But also, I would add is that for us, we look at establishing the father that you want to be, like going inside of a candy store. You know, you go inside of a candy store, or you take your kids inside of a candy store. There's so many options. There's so many things that you can be, that you can eat, and there's so many things that you like or you don't like. But really picking the father that you want to be, or characteristics of the father that you don't want to be, and using that to create the father that you want to commit to being in the future. So we take that approach, introducing various aspects of fatherhood, but also allowing the person to select who they want to be. So I think that's a part of another question, but I think it all plays into how we view relationship with fathers or not relationship with a father.
True.
Well, I think we've already started to see the foundation of how you approach this work with fathers. But maybe we could go back a little bit and get the beginning of Fathers Uplift. So can you tell us the story of how Fathers Uplift came into existence?
Absolutely. So for me, you know, it wasn't my dream to be a therapist. It wasn't my dream to start an organization. Also, I actually wanted to be a corporate attorney and sue Fortune 500 companies. But
All right, that's quite the pivot then.
Oh yeah, I kept failing the LSAT. My scores were horrible, and no law school accepted me. And when I look back at it, I'm so thankful that I didn't get accepted, because you know what I enjoy is what I'm doing now. So you know that was a start. You know, going to law, trying to go to law school, trying to complete the LSAT and not doing well, and then I found myself applying to the School of Social Work in Boston, and the company that I was working for laid me off the same day that I received my acceptance letter. So I figured, hey, stay in Georgia and live with mom, or go to Boston and do something different. And I chose the latter. And when I got to Boston and I was in the first year of my clinical social work program, I saw this opportunity to get a fellowship, to receive funds to go into the community and address an unmet health need. In any schools of psychology or schools of social work, that foundational years, really understanding yourself and kind of being a therapist of yourself, understanding what you've been through. And I realized a lot of what I experienced was connected to my father. So I got the fellowship, and the unmet need that I addressed in my community was fatherhood. So Fathers Uplift started off as a fellowship project where I would do weekly support groups with fathers at a sober home, at a local Head Start community center. And what I realized when meeting with those fathers was that all of them were physically absent, but the love they had for their kids remained intact. And then I understood what prevented them from being engaged in their kids' lives and how they ended up in the sober home in the first place. And it was severe substance use addiction and also homelessness, right? But the love they had for their kids. Every week we would eat dinner and talk about how much they loved their kids, how much they honored their kids, how afraid they were to pick up the phone and re-engage. Like picking up the phone is a barrier. Like to say, I haven't been in my kid's life for 5 to 10 years. You want me to call my kids by myself and let them know that I want to be engaged? No, you're going to get cussed out. I can't deal with that cursing out by myself. But those are barriers that you can easily ignore if you're not really in depth or connected to the population and really understand the issues. So for us, it was like, wow, you know, for some, it's easy to pick up the phone and call your kids. But for people who haven't been present for 5 to 10 years, picking up that phone is like picking up 500 pounds, right? So that's where we learned, and how Fathers Up kind of started and evolved into this clinic to really examine that emotional issue, but also support with a lot of those external issues that keep men disengaged. So that's kind of a little bit of our story. And now we're here, you know.
So, Dr. Daniels, I have 2 additional conversation pieces. First of all, reflect back. What was the first day like of Fathers Uplift?
Listen, y'all just asking so many great questions. So,
Drew trained me. The
first
We're
day,
good at digging.
listen, the first day was scary. And it was one of my most challenging days, because it was my first group at this Head Start Center. And I ordered 35 Subway sandwiches. And let me tell y'all something. I left with every sandwich in my hand.
Oh, wow.
Listen, nobody came. Nobody sent any dads. No
Wow.
dads came. So I'm like, wow. So I'm staring at the 35 sandwiches like, man, what the heck is going on? I spent all this money on these sandwiches of my $100 stipend, right?
Oh,
Thinking that all these dads are going to come. And, Subway's a good sandwich. And I ain't had no money at the time. So I had dinner for,
for a few
right?
days.
But getting over that hump of not seeing dads present really helped me pivot, but also it was a test because I could have easily quit that day. I mean, I was excited, flyers all over the building, 30 sandwiches in the room. I'm ready. Let's go. Wait for these dads to come. And nobody came. Nobody came. So that was the first day. That was the first day.
So then building on that event, when was one of the first moments you said, yes, I'm doing the right thing?
When I started hearing those fathers and got connected to that sober home, and then I realized that those dads didn't dream of being absent. They actually dreamed of being a great father. And for those dads who didn't have fathers in their lives, they dreamed of being a better father than the father than they had to them. They wanted to make sure that their children did not experience what they've experienced. But life happened and they end up becoming what they dreaded. So I'm like, wow, we in the right place. And then I heard about how hard it was to pick up the phone, how hard it was to deal with shame, how hard it is to deal with guilt and embarrassment, how they were suppressing their emotions with opiates, alcohol, drugs, issues with co-parenting, issues with trying to get back on track, finding a job with a criminal history. I mean, I've heard so many bears are like, yes, we're in the right place. We are in the right place doing the work that needs to be done. And also, to be honest with you, it made me have more compassion for my own father. It's amazing what fathers can teach you about fatherhood, but also teach you about yourself. And those men taught me more about my own father and about myself than I could ever teach them. And that's why I consider it a privilege to serve this population, because I am where I am today because a bunch of fathers that we served. So I would say, yes, that's my aha moment. Really, like, wow, you making me have more compassion for my father's experiences than I've ever had in my life. And that's what happened. They taught me so much.
Like that, Drew?
Yeah. One thing that I picked up on as you shared was how you described we're in the right place. Where many others would see barriers or issues or problems with even being able to have a type of impact, you saw opportunity. You said, we're in the right place, we're doing the right thing. So I don't think that many would approach this same population, hearing those same stories with that lens. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that and what you're seeing as, well, yeah, just talk a little bit about that if you could.
My DNA is I thrive in problem-oriented environments, right? Or situations where it appears impossible to dig out. That's kind of like my DNA. That's kind of how I thrive, right? And really understanding that any problem that you see could easily become a strength. So for me, a part of my upbringing, because my mother kept me in church every Sunday, right, was having a strong faith. So a part of that whole faith community and really believing in the power that's greater than you helps sustain me in a lot of those problems, right? And a lot of those issues that could have easily made me give up, And we don't project our faith onto anyone, but in terms of my foundation and how I navigate, my faith plays a huge part of what I do and how I live, how I show up to the work, how I deal with failures, how I deal with rejection. So I do nothing without my faith, right? And the good thing is that a part of my faith is being able to abide by the rules and let people know that I serve something greater than me without me even speaking about that power that I serve. I want them to see it through my actions and through how I endure and how I persevere. So a part of that is that whole foundational faith piece that helps me continue to look at situations and not necessarily see the glass always half empty, but I typically see glasses full more than empty anytime. Like my wife, we love old ugly houses, right? Because when we look at the house, we ain't seeing that the house has water issues. We seeing what the house can become. So I'm looking at situations like that. I'm looking at many of our men like that. I look at myself like that now. So it's just, I would say it's more so of a perspective a perspective, acquired perspective, because I wasn't always like that. That kind of developed over time. So,
Mhm.
You just mentioned you weren't always like that. When did the turn happen?
wow, it's kind of hard to see, when that turn happened. I can't tell you that the start of that turn was when I was at this university, um, with this severe thought of trying to kill myself because I was overburdened by these feelings of not feeling as if I was worthy because my father wasn't around, and blaming myself. When you blame yourself for things that you're not supposed to be blaming yourself, you know, what should not be an issue ends up becoming a greater issue for you, to the extent that you feel like you can't breathe. So I felt like I could not breathe. So I was on my way out that window. And then I remember thinking about my mother and thinking about a lot of people that love me and really want to see me thrive. And then I imagined how would life be for them if I was to take my life. And I can tell you, when I got back in that window, I asked my higher power. I said, if I'm going to live on this earth, I need two things, right? I need to know why dad was absent, and I need to be able to use my pain to make a difference. I cannot live on this earth if I don't feel worthy and I can't make a difference and really understand why I am in so much pain. So for me, that was the turning point. And then when I became acquainted with many of the men throughout this journey, it just added more nurturing and care for my inner child, right? It added more reshifting, more reframing. That development happened. Oh, having a community really just kind of evolutionized the person I am today. It really just built me up stronger. I had to remember the community that I had that stood for me that Sunday morning when they made a vow to stand for me and stand in God for my father when I was getting ready to be baptized. I had to remember the people in my church, the deacons, but I also had to remember the dads that taught me a lot about fatherhood. So I also would say community, community, and also continuously being reminded that you're not to blame for anyone's actions. So I would say, I know that's a complex answer, but I can say when I think about it from nuts and bolts, that turning point was when I got back from out that window back into the dorm room when I was getting ready to kill myself. And then I had to constantly be reminded that I had a community that loved me, and that was my crutch until I was able to see my own value. And that was a ongoing series of reminders throughout the last 10, 12 years of my life.
What I love about that is your realization that it's bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you sharing that story, Drew.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that as well. Thank you for the vulnerability and being able to bring that forward. I also heard the value of the community.
Yeah.
The old adage is it takes a village. So
Mm-hmm.
the other thing I heard, or it sounds like the work that you began doing with the fathers, it's almost like there was a virtuous cycle between your healing and the healing that you were bringing about through the work that you were doing. And so it's almost like that, again, a virtuous cycle of connection that came from that process, both for you and the men that you're building community with. So I think we have heard through many of our conversations about the power of community, and what it means to men, what it means to dads. But there are so many barriers. And that's the key thing that I really love about the work you do at Fathers Uplift is it identifies those barriers and it strategically goes after ways to overcome those barriers for the population you're serving. So would you talk to us a little bit about that? I mean, the question could be like, what's the greatest need you see in the population of fathers you serve? Or it could be, what are the barriers that you have identified and how are you working to overcome them and impact fathers?
Wow. Greatest need for, I think the first piece seems to be right down our alley. I think both, but I think that first question in terms of the greatest barrier. And the greatest barrier that we see is the difficulties to exhibit and practice self love and self care, right? Amongst men who were taught to be hard on their lives and be strong on their lives, right? This whole concept of love can be very confusing and complex. But if you break it down and really examine it and tangibly provide our men with the tools to be able to do it to themselves and display it, and also catch themselves when they're self hating as opposed to self loving, I think that's one of the greatest needs, but I also think that's one of the greatest opportunities to intervene. And especially when we're dealing with other, societal stressors and issues that we may not be able to erase ever as long as we are living. But if you strengthen a man's core, his ability to see how valuable he is, despite what happens on his outside, he can do anything he puts his mind to. So we start deep internally because I believe that that's the compass for how you navigate, even when you're dealing with racism, even when you're dealing with homelessness, when you're dealing with systemic oppression, when you're dealing with unfair child support regulations in the United States of America, or any outrageous name callings or disrespect that you have to deal with as a man, right? I think it's very important that we have opportunities for men to work on that core. And we did a scoping review and systematic review that's on the verge of being published of many of the programs, the fatherhood programs out there. And what we see is that there needs to be more emphasis on self-worth and self-love programming that helps our fathers be able to strengthen that core. Because all the other stuff is good, like helping men get housing, helping men get connected to resources, right? But if that core ain't straight, you end up losing everything you work hard for. So there's room to do both effectively. And I think we got to do more work with that core, strengthening that core. So I would say that's the greatest need. And I would say it's the greatest need internationally. I would go that far by saying that.
I mean, I want to stand up and clap and be like, yes, I agree 100%. It's the foundation, right? Yeah. It's the roots of that strong oak tree that are being built when you are, as you said, working on that core. And when the stresses of life, the challenges of life, the barriers of life come against it, it stands strong. And so that's really what you're saying is you want to see the impact. You need to work at the core, the roots, the foundation, and build that up, because then it will weather the storm no matter what comes. And that's what men need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good stuff. Well, we've been talking all these other things, but let's talk about you as a dad. We could go on about the organization forever. So would like to know if you could talk about your journey about becoming a dad, the fears, hopes, and challenges. Did they come up in the process? And how did you manage them when they came up?
Yeah, my wife and I almost divorced after our first child. Let me tell you, that pregnancy process was it was kind of like, wow, all this stuff is coming up. Oh no, relationship issues. Then you got to deal with that. We say, you know what, it just might be best for us to divorce. Thank God we didn't divorce, because I'm happy to have two people in the household parenting, because I can only imagine how hard it is to do when you have one, right? So that's one fear. I think the major fear for me becoming a father was that I would end up falling victim to the worldly circumstances similar to my father, right? That's one thing that I wanted to stay away from. So really wrestling with that was the fear. But once you get through that, you have supports in place. And I went to therapy, and I had a therapist. There was an old white woman named Lois, 70 years old. 70 years, Lois would tell me about myself. Lois would beat me and tell me about myself and ask me the tough questions. And that helped put things in, Charles, where's this coming from? And I had to answer the question honestly, because I need the help. But, in terms of solutions to help me get through that process, that's what I engaged in. Then I ended up writing a book that really became therapeutic for me, which was prenatal care, pre-father care, prenatal care for fathers, to help me reflect on my experiences during the pregnancy. And then after that, dealing with the whole, terrible twos. And once you get through terrible twos, everything else is golden. And then I started to enjoy it ever since, and not to mention, I did enjoy my son throughout the entire process, but the most difficult process was that pregnancy room. And I'm happy that we got through it, thanks to the administrative assistant who was sitting at the front desk. Let me tell you, my wife had an OBGYN, she had a nurse, she had a midwife. Everything worked perfectly for her. But when I was in the room seeing her in all that pain, I couldn't do nothing about it. I would take walks around the hospital, and I would walk in front of that administrative assistant. I would say, oh my God, can't believe she's like, I know, honey. I would walk right in front of her just to hear her say, I know. Every time I said, man, I can't take it. I know, smiling. Well, I got to, listen, this is going to be tough. I know, honey, it's going to be all right. I would walk all the way around that floor just to hear her validate me. And that was the beginning of my process, and it really got me through a tough part. But now following is very fun. The second one, my daughter, who's 1, that's been a great experience. And, once you get through the first one, the second one becomes a breeze. But the only difference between my son and my daughter is very demanding and very authoritative. So you know who owns the house right now, who's in charge. It is Maya Grace Daniels. She also is in charge of her older brother Clayton. So we listen to her. We listen to her. So it's been a journey, very fun, but a great journey. So,
I just want to, um, all of that was great, but I think want to have you talk about it, and especially in the Black environment, especially amongst Black fathers and Black men,
mhm.
stigma therapy. Could you speak to that, being a person who has done it, who has helped you? But you and I know there's a stigma, especially with many Black men, when it comes to therapy. Could you speak to that?
Oh my gosh, that stigma, right? And I can say that that stigma around therapy is definitely cultural based, and I can say that there is a lot of good reason for the stigma when you look at the medical malpractice and how black and brown people were guinea pigs and surgeries and things of that nature, and how they were mistreated. So when you look back at a great book to read, just a promo for that book is Medical Apartheid. And when you look at the, Tuskegee Airmen experiment, and you look at various other practices that have been documented that highlights the experiences of people of color, it gives reason for us to have some fear of therapy or any other type of medical care or mental health care, right? But what we find ourselves having to do is kind of re-educate, but also let them know that, yes, you may have had this experience, but it isn't the case every single time. But also another thing that we have to do better as a nation when it comes to therapy is to make sure that more clinicians of color are prepared to be therapists in communities, because I think that helps in terms of the utilization of therapy. So yes, the history is one of the main reasons why the stigma exists. And what we're lacking, what we need more of is more therapists of color. And also we need more buy-in from the community, which occurs over time, right? If they're going to an agency and they see that people are investing in them and people are culturally interested in learning about their practices, their religious practices, learning about not just hearing their issues, but willing to share some of their own issues. I think it's very important for therapists to disclose, but that's not standard practice. I think it's very important for an older person of color in the community to say, I'm not gonna come here to tell you all my business. You gotta tell me something too. I need to know you're real. That happens. The people like that are in our communities. So owning that and adding leverage to that is very important. But the stigma does exist. And I think there's a good reason for that stigma.
Mhm.
True.
Yeah, in your personal story, you talked about walking around just to get that validation,
Mhm.
in that stressful time for you. One of the things that we hear a lot is that dads or men don't really have a space where they can actually voice some of these feelings, right? And you were just simply saying, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe this," and the simple act of being validated drew you in. Maybe can you talk to us about the importance of, or how you think that can help dads if you're working with dads, if you're a partner of a dad, like how important is that?
For me personally, I think that's the most important thing. I think customer service is the most important, that I feel like we have to put more emphasis on. How do we be customer friendly? How do we be follower friendly? I think just completing a curriculum isn't enough. It isn't enough, right? How do we make sure that guys feel like they have community after? And that comes through things like validation. It comes through things like calling them on their birthdays and let them know that you appreciate them. It comes through with random phone calls. Hey, I know it's a holiday season. Just calling to check on you and see if you need anything or if I can send anything for you. I mean, like if you go to the store and you buy this nice suit, the plastic on your nice suit really makes a difference for you. You feel like, hey, they take care of my suit. So I think we need to have plastic on how we are serving fathers.
Mhm.
What is the equivalent of plastic on our interaction with fathers similar to the suits that we buy that are expensive from stores? We want to make sure that they have the same feeling that we get when we buy that suit, right? Or when we get our clothes starched and ironed at a random store that does that, right? So I think those things are equally important. I would say customer service for me is the priority. I think you can't even get through the curriculum fully, right, without the customer service. And if you do get through it, I mean, it's just for the paper. But how can you make sure that you give them that piece that I really care? And then they can walk away with not only your certificate, but a relationship, a family. And that's what we're focused on here at Fathers Uplift, giving guys family, not just credentials and certificates.
I want to ask you, spoken a little bit about organizations like your own who serve and help, in this case, Black fathers. How important is it to make sure the small things count? Because you said make it, and that's one of the things I do, just a phone call or a text message. People may think it's a small thing, but I've been in situations where that small thing gave a person to go another day. Could you share about that?
Yeah, for me, that's 99% of the job. 99% of us is doing the small things and stuff that's not required of us from a grant or required of us for completion of a program. I can't really speak to how important it is to make sure that we have people that are trained to do those things and to treat people like human beings. For us, one of the most important positions at our office is the administrative assistant. Why is that? Because if that contact with your assistant is horrible, that already sets the foundation for how they're going to receive services. Also, the pictures you have on your wall, the magazines that you have on your desk, or the magazines that you have on the table, right? I mean, the voicemail and how you're leaving a voicemail and how your voice sounds, right? The text messages that you send. I mean, the small things matter. And I think, programs that are doing multiple things where fatherhood isn't necessarily a priority, I think in terms of re-engagement or consistent engagement, they can easily miss the mark because fatherhood isn't necessarily a priority. But also, I think they also can practice those small things, whether fatherhood is a priority or not. But I think they have to pay closer attention to the smaller things. And I think that's where a lot of practitioners mess up, is that we're not paying attention to the smaller things. Some of us are emphasizing more of the programmatic components and forgetting about the customer service stuff that's very important. And that's the major indicator of success for your program. So I would say that would be my answer to that question.
Okay. Drew?
Well, there's so many things that you share, Dr. Daniels, that I want to, just jump on and be like, yes, couldn't agree more. John Maxwell, people are probably going to get tired of me saying this, but I'm going to keep bringing John Maxwell up just because he's been a mentor for me. And I think there's so much value I take. He's got a simple statement of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And in your example there, those small things, those details demonstrate care for the person, for the individual, and that draws them in first. And then you can move on to what's next from there. So I think it's just a very great approach to bring to an organization who's serving. And so thanks for sharing that perspective. So maybe you could do this for us. I'm just curious because I love the work that you're doing and I want to see continued growth for Fathers Uplift. Maybe you could go 25 years into the future for Fathers Uplift. I know this is a stretch question, but what do you want to see and what will the results of your work with fathers produce 25 years from now?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I would want to see offices, brick and mortar offices for Fathers Uplift, where we're serving in communities where there's a need throughout the country. I also want to see a change in policies that are more friendly to fathers, specifically as it relates to child support enforcement agencies in the United States of America, and really not only look at the value of father's earning, but also a value of his willingness to be in his child's life, but also looking at how those things interfere as barriers, right? So really a more comprehensive father-friendly policy that takes into consideration many of the barriers that they experience, from child support to family and probate court, the whole 9 yards. And I would like for Fathers Up to play a role in changing some of those policies, right? So that's one thing. That's the second thing that I would like to see. And also, I would like to see that more practitioners that are trained to become case managers and social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists have access to courses and curriculums that specifically focus on father engagement and treating men the way that they should be treated at every phase of their journey as fatherhood. I think that's equally important. Currently, there isn't hardly any courses that really focuses on those things, right? When you look at the course offerings and what's required for a person to become a social worker or become a psychologist, we're not asking them questions about fatherhood and how to engage fathers. We're not asking them questions about, how to engage Black and brown men. Those are questions that don't come about, but we should be on these examinations. We should have curriculums that teach them on how to do that. And I think that would contribute to practitioners being more prepared. So I would say to engage us, right? To engage fathers, but also engage Black and brown men. So when I think about 25 years from now, I would like to see that. More practitioners trained on how to work with fathers at every phase of their journey, more comprehensive policies that support, that are more father friendly, hold them accountable, but also father friendly, from probate and family court to child support, and also more offices for Fathers Uplift throughout the country. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too. Hear your vision, hear you talking about that.
I want to see if we can slip in a real quick question. I know it's a terrible time to put in, but because you have a great lens, give us your lens on Black and brown fatherhood during the pandemic and Black and brown fatherhood now.
Mm. So I think Black and brown fatherhood during the pandemic was reminded, right, in a very aggressive way that, and they knew that this was a reality, but they were reminded more so than ever, but also triggered more so than ever, that racism is still a real and prominent thing in our community. I mean, they witnessed modern day lynchings during the pandemic, right? Via news outlets throughout the country. Had to continue to see that. The second piece they had to deal with is communicating to their children what was actually going on throughout news outlets, specifically in the United States of America. What was going on? What happened to brothers like Eric Garner? What happened over here, right? So to not only be triggered and to witness some of these things, these modern day lynchings, but you also got to talk to your kids about it, talking about the burden that you have to experience and have to deal with, right? That came twofold during the pandemic. And you have to deal with COVID, right? And if you have other issues, you got to deal with that. So we're talking about compound stress, compound post-traumatic stress disorder, compound vicarious trauma, right? So you think about it from that angle. I think now we're trying to deal with that, and some of that stuff is coming down a little bit, but the reality is still present. So I would say that's the difference between what Black and brown men, fathers were dealing with during the pandemic and what they're dealing with now. I mean, we're still dealing with the residue of that whole experience. But, I can say that it also became a test of our resilience as well, because if you're a Black and brown father and you made it through the pandemic, man, I don't listen, my heart goes out to you. You are extremely, extremely strong in a good way. And you're strong and vulnerable, because I know you shed a few tears, even though you may not acknowledge it. Whether you're in the community and that you haven't seen your kids in 5 to 10 years, that you have a second chance. Keep trying, it gets better. And what they want to see is consistency. So keep it up.
It's
Yeah, absolutely. Very powerful message, especially knowing that your child is always looking for you in some way, shape, or form, and to keep trying, to keep going, to keep putting that effort in, because it does make a difference. Yeah, very powerful.
nice. Well, it has come to an end, unfortunately, because we all have us to serve, families to serve, and men to serve. And I'd like to say, Dr. Daniels, thank you for taking time today to be on the Dad Central show. If you're watching this, you can get in touch with the great organization, Fathers Uplift, at fathersuplift.org, Twitter at Fathers Uplift, Facebook, Fathers Uplift Inc., LinkedIn, Fathers Uplift Inc. So basically, anywhere you go social media wise, just put in Fathers Uplift because they've made themselves, I'd say, very Google-licious. So they have done a great stuff. And thank you so much for the hard work you and your organization have done, are doing, and will be doing. Look forward to hearing more of the successes. And we are here to help you and help fathers around the world be better. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you. Y'all got to invite me to Canada. I'm coming.
All right.
All right.
We can't wait to have you here.
All right. Be well. Keep the faith.
All right. Take care.
All right, everyone. Another great conversation. And of course, we asked Drew to give the wrap up.
Wrap up's hard for me on this one because there are so many, I think, great messages that Dr. Daniel shared with us. But I think I'll just wrap it up for me personally. The fact that compassion was one of the things he led with. And I think we heard compassion through all of what he shared as far as the work that they're doing in Fathers Uplift, and being able to acknowledge the value of men and come alongside them, as opposed to ostracize them, ridicule them, challenge them, all those other things. And I think that that's the value that they're bringing to a population that certainly needs it, and in a way that's clearly making a significant impact. And so it's I think a very powerful and important message. So compassion is the takeaway for me today.
I will quickly just say, of the many things, one of the things that stuck out, and I've always believed in this since I started this journey of helping fathers and men around the world, look at the man first. He was a man before he was a father. I've always believed that, and I agree with Dr. Daniels. I think that's the best way to approach it, because there are dreams, goals, and desires that a father hasn't achieved as a man that we don't want him to give up on. So I love what he had to say. I love everything he had to say, and looking forward to hearing more from him. And I'm looking forward to him to come to Canada too. So as we say, the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. Hey, we want to hear from you. Number of ways you can do that. Podcast at dadcentral.ca is email. You can watch us. Go to dadcentral.ca/podcasts. And also, we have a pile of resources, a lot of them free, on the website, dadcentral.ca. So I'd like to say thank you, everyone, for watching this. And wherever you're watching this, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. If you subscribe, tell someone else to subscribe, because we have more epic conversations coming. Thanks, everyone. Be well. Make sure you give yourself grace, and don't just manage your time, manage your energy. Take care.